they tell the joke about the young Jewish couple that moves from Europe to America many years ago, and they're ready to begin a family, and Baruch Hashem, she's pregnant, and they go to the hospital for the delivery, and they're told at the hospital that we have good news for you, you're having twins. And the father immediately passes out. He faints at this news, and thank God the birth and the delivery is all good. Everyone's healthy except for the poor father who's still passed out. And they have to give a name to the child because in Jewish tradition we name as quickly as possible. And so what do? Let's call in the uncle. Maybe he'll know what the father wanted, or maybe he'll give us some advice as to what the name should be. And then finally the father comes to a few days later, and he realizes what's happened. He said, "Oy vey, you let my brother get, he's even newer to the country. He doesn't speak English. He doesn't know names to give the children in this new world. What name did he give to our daughter?" And he's told, "Well, your brother gave your daughter the name Denise." And the father says, "Oh, actually, Denise, that's a really nice name. That's not as bad as I thought it was going to be. And to my son, what name did he give to my son?" To which he's told, "To your son, he called the nephew." The joke is predicated on the understanding that names mean a great deal to us in Jewish tradition. That we name, in particular, we name both Ashkenazic and Sephardic custom. Many within the Sephardic community have a tradition of naming after the living. In Ashkenazic community, a very strong tradition of naming after those who have passed on. The names that we give to our children carry extraordinary meaning. But what that meaning is has changed over time. There's a midrash based on the events of our parasha, as Jacob is having his children, both last week and this week's parasha, he's having his children and giving them names. And their names, according to the Midrash cites the name of Rabbi Yosi, that Harishonim, that the original ones, going back to biblical times, they would call their children Al Shem HaMe'ura. They would call them based on the event that was happening, what was happening in their lives, the emotion that they were feeling at the time of birth. For example, Judah is called Yehudah because of the connection to the word Todah, or gratitude, whatever they were feeling in the moment. Again, note that Jacob, the grandson of Abraham had passed away. We know that the tradition that the birthright was sold at the time of when Jacob gave the lentil soup, gave the red soup, the red stew to Esau in exchange for the birthright, that event took place at the Shiva for Abraham. So the grandfather had passed away. Now the great-grandchildren are being born, and they're not named Avraham. Jacob does not name one of his sons Avraham, does not name a daughter Sarah after his own grandparents. That doesn't happen. The original ones they named after the emotion of the moment, because the Midrash says, because they knew their lineage. They knew their history. They didn't need names to remind them to whom they were connected. But us, because we have less knowledge of where we come from, less understanding, that we have to name our children to remind us of our history. There's a folk tale that's told of the man who wants to go from Tzfat. He lives in a village outside of Tzfat and wants to go to Jerusalem. Never been outside of his village, and he wants to make the pilgrimage for the first time, and he's worried, how am I going to get there? How will I know how to go? But a wise person who's done the journey before tells him, on the way to Jerusalem's a big city, and there are signs all along the way, this way to Jerusalem. And so the man goes, he embarks on his trip, and sure enough, every crossroads there's a sign, this way to Jerusalem. He gets to Jerusalem. Of course it's beautiful, of course it's amazing, of course it's wonderful, and then it's time to go home. And what he didn't realize, that while he was in Jerusalem, there was a major storm in the countryside. And so he gets outside of the city, gets to the countryside, and he discovers that all of the signs have been knocked down. And he doesn't know which way to Tzfat. And then he has an epiphany. He realizes, he said, I don't know which direction it is to Tzfat, but I know which direction to Jerusalem because that's where I came from. So if I pick up all the signs and point the arrow in the direction where I came from to Jerusalem, then the other arrow is inevitably going to be correct. It's going to point me in the way of my destination. And that's reflected in the Jewish custom of naming. That's reflected in so much of what we do in life, of how we name our children, of how we live our lives, is that if we know where we came from, if we know the Jerusalem in that story, then we'll know where we are going to. Then we'll know where we're destined to end up, where our journey will lead us. That's a core Jewish value as we approach the Shabbat, as we approach Chanukah. We learn the story of our history. We celebrate the great moments in our history, not only because we have gratitude for what God has done for us in the past, but also because these moments, these insights, give us guidance as to where we're going in the future. Stay healthy and well, everyone. I wish you a Shabbat Shalom, a Shabbat of rest, a Shabbat of inspiration, a Shabbat of connection. And please God, we will pray and study and learn and gather together very soon. Shabbat Shalom.
Dear friends, as we prepare to usher in Shabbat, what we do is we put a close to the week at hand, but we also prepare to usher in the upcoming week. And as we look ahead, we recognize that the holiday of Hanukkah will commence next week. The holiday represents and celebrates the miracle of the oil. A little can of oil that was supposed to last but one day lasted for an additional week, allowing for new stock of oil to be produced. But I ask you, was the miracle that great? Was the miracle of oil lasting an extra 7 days that amazing? It's not the first time that we have miracles involving oil. Just a couple of weeks ago in Parshat Vayera, we read of Elisha, the prophet, the way he produced oil to help Ovadiah's wife. And so really, this miracle warrants an 8-day holiday. What I want to propose to you perhaps is the way in which we observe and we appreciate this miracle. Perhaps that is what we celebrate. Many times, candles that you light last way beyond the hours on which the box it comes in marks. I remember a couple of times Shabbat candles that are supposed to last 3 to 5 hours. On many occasions, I come down Shabbat morning to prepare my Torah reading and prepare for the Shabbat. And I look, and one of the candles perhaps is still burning. So certainly, sometimes candles, oil, might last longer than we anticipate. But perhaps what we're actually celebrating is in despair when we are faced with a difficult situation which the Jews in the time of Hanukkah faced. Any little hope, any little amount of light is greatly appreciated, but we must also take that opportunity to appreciate those little things, those little miracles that happen in our lives. And that is really what the Jews did. They so greatly appreciated what happened, way beyond just a little idea of that oil just lasted for an extra 7 days. They saw it as a great happening. How much more so in our time during this pandemic, which is a dark period in our lives. How much every little thing that brings us happiness, brings us goodness, brings us light, we should take the time to appreciate it and consider it as a personal miracle. Back to our parasha of this week, of Vayishlach. Just as Jacob is ready to confront his brother Esav, there is a story of Jacob wrestling with a mysterious man. And the sages teach us that the man wrestling with Jacob was no ordinary man. He was actually Esav's guardian angel, disguised as a human. Now, before Yaakov could reconcile with his brother, he first had to wrestle with Esav's guardian angel. And the Kabbalists elaborate and explain this following. They explain that Jacob and Esav represent conflicting aspects of life, spiritual and material. And in order to understand this, we can also look at the usage of words in the Torah. The Torah tells us, Vaye'avek ish imo. The word Vayavek and wrestles comes from the word avak, the root word avak, which is dust. This is the same root word that also we spell the word avuka, which is a torch. And so the body and the soul are in constant warfare, each trying to draw the other towards what they appreciate and what they enjoy. The body tries to pull the soul towards materialism, while the soul tries to pull the body towards spirituality. And so what does Vayavek, wrestling, and avuka, and a torch have in common? With its use of a single root word for wrestle and torch, Vayavek and avuka, the Lashon HaKodesh, the holy tongue of the Torah, teaches us about the goal of wrestling between the body and the soul. The goal is not to obliterate material concerns and pleasures from one's life. The goal is to create the torch. A torch is not a single candle, but many points of combustion merged together. And that creates that spiritual light, a spiritual torch, not just a little candle, but a huge torch. And the soul must not retreat from this world. It must embrace the materials and the material world and fuse it into the torch of light. It must use the object and pleasures of the material world in which we live in as a tool to spread spiritual light. It must use the material blessings. We must use the material blessings that we have and fuse them into a spiritual torch, producing light, warmth, inspiration, and illumination for this world, especially during the times in which we live in. I hope that you are a source of light. I wish you warmth, safety, and wishing you Chag Urim Sameach, Happy Chanukah, and Shabbat Shalom.